Great to be here and very inspired by your speeches, but also presence here in Italy. I'm Luca Bergamaschi from the Italian think tank ECCO. We are based in Italy. We do lots of work, of course, in Italy, Europe, but increasingly in the Mediterranean and with African partners, including some African parliamentarians. It's good to see you here. And to be honest, it's a shame that there are no more Italian parliamentarians here or parliamentarians from G7 countries, which I think they should definitely join. It's good to see Canada here. It's very important given that Canada will have the G7 presidency next year. So it's important we start thinking about how to increase pressure to advance progress in the G7, because the long story short is that there is very little progress in G7 countries to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. In the slide before, I just wanted to show where we got in terms of G7 commitments. So this is just to say that, so where we are so far, so maybe I'll start with this. Where we are so far is basically between 2020 and 2022, G7 were still providing 25.6 billion each year in international support. So this if you want, there are international fossil fuel subsidies for projects that G7 are supporting through the development financial institutions. For example, Italy is the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, in Germany is the KfW, and the Export Credit Agency are those public agencies that provide credits and guarantees for investment in fossil fuels. So despite being a commitment to phase out international support by 2022, we see that this promise is broken. I think we'll probably hear more later from my colleague Simone and others. This is international support. Can you go to the next slides? This is the domestic. So at domestic level, you will see that in 2022, we estimated something around 200 billion still there for fossil fuel subsidies, which is massive. And if you see the spike, it is because we had the gas price crisis from the following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The spike is particularly in European countries, the UK. But again, just to remember that the previous slide that you couldn't see before, the G7 committed to phase out fossil fuel subsidy next year. So they're saying next year we should get rid of 200 billion like this. So it's a lot, and we think also the promise will be broken. But of course we know that it's not easy. Politically it's not easy because a lot of the subsidies goes to protect low-income households, but not all of them. So a lot of the increase that came in terms of subsidies went to actually high-income households, because second home or have a huge use of gas because of lifestyles, that they also benefit from some of this subsidies. So it's very important that when you design a policy, it's targeted for only those households that are low income and energy. Otherwise, your budget explodes, and that's why you see that huge peak. So there is still a lot more to do despite G7 commitments. So G7, they like to talk, but it's sometimes difficult to turn them into action. That's why it's important that we should have more parliamentarians from G7 countries join in, because they need to bring forward this commitment in their constituencies. So next slide. But there is also some interesting examples from G7 countries, for example, from Italy. So since 2017, Italy published every year a catalogue of, they call it, of environmentally harmful subsidies, which also contain fossil fuel subsidies, and basically is a tool to monitor and transparently publish how much the state is providing. And every year, on average, Italy estimates that provide 20 billion in harmful subsidies, which is good. It's good to know that the government shows this data, because civil society and parliamentarians can have a public debate, and there can be public scrutiny about what the government is doing. So this catalog looks at all number of subsidies that are used at local level, at national level, international level, for example in the transport sector. And it's interesting because what you see that a lot of these subsidies are decided in the budget law, so parliamentarian has a lot of impact, but a lot of them are prepared by the finance ministries. And so as the Honourable Senator from Canada reminded us, this is not just a climate issue, so we really need to get finance minister much more involved, because from a climate change perspective, we know what we have to do, but the finance minister are very, very conservative because, of course, there are social impacts around it, so it's important that we need to be mindful of that. Next slide. That said, what Italy is actually doing, not very much. So for the driving class government managed to reduce subsidies by 100 million. Compared to 100 million is really, really little. So there's much more that can be done. The current government is committed to gradually phase out fossil fuel subsidy by 2030, so we will see what we get, and there is concrete commitment from the Italian government to remove 2 billion by 2026 and 3.5 billion by 2030. It's very late compared to what G7 said. G7 said in 2025, but at least they started looking at it. And the reason why Italy is committing to it is because the European Commission is putting conditions for accessing funds. So the Repowering EU is a European fund that basically said if you want to commit to have the funding, you need to review your subsidies. So, which we think is very good. So the slide that you couldn't see before basically showed you where we got in terms of G7 language. And this year in Turin, G7 countries committed to provide a progress record next year, but also for the first time, they committed to try to define what inefficient fossil fuels are. Okay, here we go. So, this is a little bit of history about the G7 commitment. The long story short is that we've been talking about this for 15 years. Since 2009, in the G20 leaders, where they said that over the medium term, we need to phase out inefficient. So very big. What does it mean over medium term? What does it mean inefficient? In the G7 in 2016, they set the target of 2025. Again, talking about inefficient. The question is there an inefficient fossil subsidy? We don't know. In 2021, in Glasgow, G7 countries except Japan committed to phase out international fossil fuel subsidies. The reality is that, as you saw, they're still committing 25 billion to international fossil fuel subsidies. And in 2023, as you see, G7 at least ended subsidies for coal in 2021. It was a very good step forward, because now when we talk about fossil fuels, basically we talk about gas and oil. I think that is an important thing to keep in mind. And at COP28, in the GST text, we really saw commitment from all signatories in Dubai to phase out, for the first time, inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that basically take into account basically the energy poverty and the just transition issue, really the social needs that are attached to it. Because yes, we need to phase out, but we need to also keep in mind that for a period of time, some social classes are still in support. But again, the COP28 is a global now target. So next slide. So as I was saying, this year there's been some progress, because for the first time G7 said we want a common definition of inefficient, because no one understands what inefficient means. So this year there will be effort. We don't know how, but we think that the OECD and IEA will try to work around the definition, and then we expect a report next year. So the report for next year might be interesting also for you to scrutinize better what G7 are doing, and they committed to the full implementation of ending international fossil fuel subsidies, which is again a broken promise from 2022. As you know, I added some other part. There is this target of transition away from fossil fuels, which we think could be a good driver also for subsidies, if it is implemented in domestic plans and policies. Again, we hope the finance minister will be involved in setting up domestic plans for transition away from fossil fuels. And again, there's a recognition that trillions of dollars needed for the transition. But the interesting thing is that all this stuff was agreed by the climate minister in April. Then 3 weeks after, so in mid-May, the finance minister met, and there was no language about subsidy. So even in the same country, is not able to speak the same language. So this is an interesting development. Next slide, please. So I already talked about this. Next slide. Next slide. There was Italy again, and I think my last slides, if there is the conclusions. Next one. Okay. So what we would like to see from the G7. So first, to find a common definition of inefficient. So we would like to see that by the end of the year, and also hopefully socialized mainstream by OECD. So that also maybe the G20 can start thinking about what is efficient, what is inefficient. We need to see a strategy, not only just a commitment, but a strategy of how to do it, and probably starting from what we call no regret. No regret as those that have the least social economic impact. And there is plenty of useless subsidies that we're just using. For example, in Italy for supporting diesel car, which is the most polluted now, way of transport. And finally, we would like to see some steps from now until the end of the year towards the 2025 deadline. So, for example, for Italy, as I told you, there are 20 billion subsidies. We identified at least 5 billion that you could cut it tomorrow with very little impact. And it's about political will, and that's why we need to see many more MPs from Italy and from other legislative countries joining your leadership. And it's great to see the leadership, in particular from the South country, here also coming to Italy. It's very refreshing, inspiring, and very happy to support you. And thank you for your leadership. Thank you.